Ladies and gentlemen, guys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Age of Warfare podcast. I'm Centurion Anxious Maximus, and as always, that's the Gate Aiden Cornier, and we are going to be continuing our discussion about Wales because we did not get to cover everything since we had a bit of a late show last time. But as always, before we get started, Aiden, how you doing today, buddy?
Not too bad. Too bad. Been spent the day inside. We've got a bit of a storm over here in the UK at the moment. But that's fine. It's the weekend. Just watch films all day.
That's all right. It sounds like a fun day. Just stay inside, wait for the rain, wait for the storms, and
Yep.
all that. The weather here is wonderful. I got up today. It was nice and cool this morning. I was outside reading. Yeah, it felt great, man. Yep, the Christmas winds are coming this way now, so I'm excited for that. Uh, but anyway, as you may well know, last week we were, 2 weeks ago, I should say, the last show we were talking about Wales and how that the little part of that little country that could be, even though it's surrounded by England, how is Wales Wales different from the rest of the United Kingdom? And we started to get into the many different topics, but there was some that we didn't really cover so much. And there was one that I really wanted to cover a little more. If going back to the days of William Wallace, William Wallace against Edward Longshanks. What was Wales really involved in that particular war, or was Wales more of a spectator in that particular war between Scotland and England?
So, what you have, I think we covered it a little bit last time. I talked about the Marcher Lords, which are on the borders of England. You've got them on the borders of England and Wales, and so obviously on the border with Scotland, you've got the equivalent thing up there, and it's because the countries are raiding each other because it's essentially Scotland's separate country, separate monarchy, and everything. It's a war between those two nations. Obviously, with the English army fighting against the Scots, the Marcher Lords then have to really pay attention to what's going on, because obviously they've got to send some of their soldiers, and some of them have to go up to fight against Scotland. But that means having less soldiers defending their lands. Any Welsh raids from Welsh can increase. So they weren't directly involved in it, but the fact that there is a war going on and the nation's manpower is depleted, it leaves it a little bit open for them. Let me just get the timelines up. So one of the big things that Wales has is they were also part of the military as well. So the famous longbowmen, a lot of that developed out of Welsh longbowmen.
Yes.
While the whole country then longbows became a thing, it wasn't just exclusively Welsh. The Welsh weren't exclusively longbowmen as well. You ended up with a lot of Welsh soldiers within the ranks of British, especially in the 100 Years' War, which is obviously the Longshanks. That's then leading into that central period is around that time as well. So you would have had the Welsh in the English army fighting in Scotland as well. So it's not inconceivable because a lot of the time when those campaigns finish and you have these soldiers, France had a real problem with these soldiers who now didn't have anything to do, creating bandit gangs and attacking and acting as mercenaries as well. So it's not inconceivable that you then get some of these Welsh troops fighting on the Scottish side as well, purely for that's their job, is soldiering. So you need to go somewhere. Oh, there's a war over there. Let's go join in that war. But as a nation, it wasn't as well, because it's Wales is still at this point is divided into these different principalities. They're not really the monarch is the English monarch. There is no real Welsh king in charge. That's one of the big things, and we mentioned it last time about Wales. Wales didn't really have a monarchy as well, and then becomes tied later on with the Tudors into the full, what then becomes the UK monarchy as well, where the countries and monarchies all get merged at various different points.
Yeah, okay. What I find interesting, Aiden, is obviously, England, it started out as many different countries, and then it expanded. Wales never really expanded. Wales, the way it is now, is always the way it's been when it comes to the size of the empire. They never really conquered anything or never really expanded its borders, which I find pretty interesting, so to say.
Yeah, it's quite interesting how it developed. So if you go right the way back into say the Romans, for example,
Right.
we talked a bit about this with the geography of Wales. Unless you're on the edges of Wales, the sort of the coastline, you've got a lot of mountainous terrain. It's very hard to traverse. And while you can have farming going on, the resources that are there, you can get those resources near the coasts well enough without having to go completely inland. So obviously, once the Romans then leave, obviously we then get into obviously with the Saxons and the kingdoms forming. Once they leave, it goes back to the tribal things. So in Wales, where the Romans hadn't really pushed down as much on the central tribal areas as well, they still had more defined areas that they were in. Whereas within England, a lot of those tribal areas, the edges have become a bit blurred because it was Roman. They'd been abolished, as it were. So they were still there, and people knew what they were, but the borders were fuzzier. So because of that, that's how you get this change in England when the Saxons turn up and build their kingdoms. Those old tribal borders go away. Whereas obviously Wales still has those tribal borders and is involved in some of these conflicts. We brought into like Cumbria, Devon and Cornwall as well, those areas on the fringe. They stayed as relatively set areas, and now we have them as counties, but they didn't really move and expand. And Wales on the west, especially, is dealing with Ireland. There's a lot of war and trade going between Ireland and Wales. And obviously, when the Vikings come down as well, obviously they settle in Dublin. So you then get the western coast of Wales dealing with Vikings, not as much as obviously the east coast where they land as well. But this then comes down to the terrain. If you want to make a settlement, you're going to do that on the coast as well. So trying to expand your borders when you've got that terrain is quite difficult to see the need. Whereas in England, you have the borders expanding because a lot of those smaller kingdoms join and become part of larger kingdoms. So you end up obviously with Wessex and Mercia being the most prominent ones, with Kent as well. But Kent ends up getting sort of subsumed into the south in general. And then obviously when you have Danelaw, that's everything sort of northeast. It comes under one banner. So they all get merged together quite early. So once the Vikings leave, it's the English kingdoms already merging with Mercia and Wessex. They're merging to become the English against the Danes, and then you end up with the whole country together. Whereas obviously in Wales, they haven't gone into the very centre very often. So it's not until the Normans come along that you see Wales being conquered fully as a country. But even then, the Normans just built castles all around the edge as well. So you've got this culture that stays alive because there's far less interference in it as well. Whereas English culture is such a melting pot because you've got these pockets around the country where you've got definite bits of culture. You find it up like the West Country in general. There's farming communities. You've got sort of East Anglia as an area, and that's when we look at those areas. They're very similar to these old Saxon kingdoms as well. So you do get some of that, but it's sort of more spread around as well, rather than the very definite "this is this" in this area. And then obviously once you get to the eastern border of Wales, you've got a giant bit of water and a river. So it's not really until you're in the far northeast that you're getting relatively easy land crossings, and that's quite mountainous up there as well. So you've got a really nice natural border to come over. So that's where the martial lords come in, is stopping them coming over the border. No one saw the need to go through all of that effort to combat each other. So you end up having this very static country being created.
Oh, okay. So I mean, I always found that interesting. Because I was gonna say, I'm sure I told you this on the last show, but it's still repeating. I played Medieval 2 Total War, and it's the Britannia expansion pack, and it does such a good job dividing the British Isles. You got the Norway, the Vikings, out in the waters. Then you got the Scottish, the English, and then the Welsh. I love playing as Wales and expanding it to England. It's like a good alternative history, kind of scenario. And then you got Ireland, the Irish. It's a wonderful scenario, man. It's a great, it's well executed and all that. And so, I've always found Wales to be like an interesting source of a nugget of information. Like it's such a small little mountainous region, and yet it survived despite English trying to kill off the Scottish, and then the English had to fight off the Barons. That's another one we have to talk about, the Barons revolts in England.
Yeah. There was a lot of that going on, especially the 1200s was a bit of a messy time, really, and that's where you start to get after that. That's where you then leading into this stability as well, which is where Longshanks comes into it,
right?
Especially in how you divide up who has what lands and who swears fealty to who, which is another reason for some of the stability in Wales, because there is no king.
Right.
When you've got a king on your border and you're swearing fealty and making treaties there, because of the way that the feudal world worked, they're a lesser level of noble than the King of England. So there's this soft political power that can be sort of used to prevent Wales uniting under a king. I mean, they've tried it several times as well with the various Welsh princes. And then obviously that's what led to several of the wars.
And Age of Empires too. As you could play as the Britons, the Celts, the Franks, not the Welsh. I mean, that should be a civilization you should consider adding the Welsh civilization to Age of Empires too. It'd be a pretty. Although some people might say that the Welsh are too similar to the Britons. Now that's another question I wanted to ask. Do you think the Welsh were similar to the Britons back then, or were there significant differences between them?
It's what's interesting. So obviously, when the Romans turned up, the British Isles is just a series of tribal areas. There's no Wales and England and Scotland. It's those areas start to become formed because of what the Romans do and where they divide the country up. Because as I said, obviously that natural border that you have between England and Wales, that's the Romans use that as a relatively natural border. You then have with Scotland, obviously you've got Hadrian's Wall and the Antonine War, because for similar reasons they didn't see it as a region that was worth going into. So you end up as soon as you've defined what England is, then the other areas of land are defined as something else. And it goes back to the name of the country, Wales, comes from the Saxon name for foreigner. And that is all because they're still Celtic. They don't stop being Celtic. The Saxons don't go in and change the culture like you have in England. You end up with them still being, they're no different to the rest of the Britons, because Britons are literally everyone on the island. It's just that Wales then stays as that part of the Celtic fringe as a country, a bit like Ireland does as well. You've got a Celtic country that stays as a Celtic country with its own language, its own customs, and there's older languages. So realistically, if you look at Welsh and you look at like English. English is an imported language, obviously, from the Saxons. It's got the Germanic bit. It then changes again with the Normans. That's where we get the Romance languages coming in from French, where they merge. And then within that, you're losing this more local, the Britannic languages and these Celtic languages. Whereas obviously Wales, Ireland, and Scotland keep those languages alive for a longer period of time. Cornwall does to a large extent. It isn't until I think it's the early 1900s you finally get those people dying off. It's the Industrial Revolution really where that is the death knell of those local languages within England itself as everything becomes connected. But the Welsh put a lot of effort into, Welsh almost died out, and then they put a lot of effort into bringing the language back and stopping it from dying as well. So then making sure it was taught in schools, and there are laws on the books of how things have to be to make sure that Welsh stays as a language. Obviously, with the Industrial Revolution, everyone's speaking English, and with Wales being well known for lots of coal, it gets brought into the British Empire as a more central force because of the resources that are there. And you get along the south coast as well, where you get a lot of this industry and a lot of the mining. You actually get sort of the Midlands area where we do a lot of the mining in England. They were moving a lot of people from there who had the skills and experience, then go into the southern part of Wales on the south coast, which then leads to the modern sort of north-south divide in Wales, where the southern side of it is more English, whereas the north is very much still definitely Welsh, where Welsh is a primary language. Whereas if you're in the south, it's a complete mix of Welsh and English, and mainly people will speak English, even if they can speak Welsh, until you get obviously out into slightly more rural areas where the Welsh is kept alive a bit more as well. So yeah, you get it's essentially it's a holdout, it's a Celtic holdout, and those original Britons that were trying to get away from the Saxons would have gone into Wales to stay with that culture. Within Wales as well. So you do get some intermingling of those Celtic tribes originally getting pushed further west, and then there's no further west that they can go unless they pop over to Ireland, obviously, but on the landmass itself, there isn't really anywhere else to go. So you end up with it's just not taken over and had that all the cultural changes that England has. Wales has not had that much influence from them to change them.
Mr. Dungeon Dan, thank you for joining. We will be discussing the difference between beluga whales and killer whales today. Good morning, Dan. I love you, Dan. But no, although I don't know, are there whales by you guys? Are there actual whales by you guys? And I know it's a dumb question, but I mean, Dungeon Dan did bring it up.
So obviously, where Wales is, and obviously think of Cornwall, there's nothing. It's just water from Cornwall until you get to the US, obviously. But the southern part of Wales, obviously, is directly across from Ireland, but it's still very close to the Atlantic. So you do get whales coming up into the Irish Sea and around that area as well. But with England, you occasionally get them coming up the Channel. You might get a whale that gets very confused and tries to get up the Thames. That's happened a few times as well. And it causes no end of problems with the shipping as well. They get in the shipping lanes near London. But yeah, they do, but it's mainly obviously to the west towards the Atlantic, unless they get confused by all of the sonars from the shipping as well. So yeah, there we are. An answer to that question.
There we are. And before we move on, I wanted to share the screen, show you a little something. This is the Canopy Castle in South Wales. This is the castle in South Wales with the moat. And I was reading a report that they're planning to do some renovations.
These castles. So there's where we've got the National Trust, and the National Trust then split up in. So you've got English Heritage as well. Mm-hmm. Wales has their own groups, very similar to that. That are the Welsh it's basically the same name but with Welsh in front of it instead. And they do a lot of work, obviously, like English Heritage do. Nearly all of the castles in our country are owned by them as well, by these heritage institutions. And I often find it weird because obviously the Welsh ones, they're trying to build Welsh heritage, and castles are a big symbol in Wales of people who came in and attacked the Welsh and then built castles to control them. And if you go up into the northwest, I can't remember the name of the castle now. It's an absolutely fantastic castle that's got all kinds of interesting bits in it, but they never finished it. And that is another one that's heavily maintained as well, which is really, really quite cool that they're putting the money and effort into keeping them alive. And you can, the one in Swansea, you can go there. What they tend to do is put sort of iron grating over to stop you getting into the main bit of the castle. And then they have a park around it, so you can go and sit and look at the castle just to protect it at the same time. But yeah, if you build a castle properly, it's going to stay there forever, really, until someone comes along with the trebuchet.
Age of Warfare is one of the educational channels I watch. All I know about the history of Wales is what I gleaned from the show Vikings.
Yes, yeah. There's because they come up in Last Kingdom as well. So that bit that I was talking about with the Saxons and the difference between the Saxon kingdoms, the Welsh kingdoms, and then Cornwall and Devon as well. They come up in that as a separate peoples to do that, and obviously in the Vikings because it's set in exactly the same time. You get you get that as well.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Although Dungeon Dan, you might want to check out Kings and Generals. It's a good YouTube channel. Kings and Generals, they're a good history YouTube channel, and they do have a video about the history of medieval Wales. It's a pretty long one, but it's a pretty good. I love Kings and Generals on YouTube. Great YouTube channel. They've been doing a history for a while. They got a video they released last year about the history of medieval Wales. So great. You might want to. You can check that out as well. You can look it up. Kings and Generals. And I believe these guys are British, or they're from the UK as well. These guys who have the channel.
Sorry, click the wrong button. Yeah. There's a lot of good stuff out there.
Actually, no. You said actually, these guys are Canadian. They're in Canada, but they know their stuff though. And they also had a good one on the Bactrian Kingdom, which is actually a topic we're going to do here sometime. I think it might be our next topic, the Bactrian Indo-Greek Kingdom.
I was just looking something up quickly. So yeah, I was just trying to work out. Found the name of the only guy to unite Wales. I couldn't remember what year it was in, but I found that, and that was before the Norman Conquest as well. So that was in the times there with the Saxons. So when you think about it, it's England as we know it. Really, a lot of that stems from 1066, especially with the monarchs. It's generally dated from then. So it's Wales as an entity hasn't had a monarch for the entire time that England's really been at how we see England as well, which adds to what we were talking about before. Right, there is that, and to that question you were asking.
Actually, before hold that thought. Saxons. What region do they come from? The Saxons.
So, this is quite complicated.
It's a tough question.
It's
because
it's so if you go back to the Romans and Julius Caesar conquering Gaul, we know the Gauls as Gauls and the Celtic peoples because that's what the Romans called them. So they then divided up between these Celts for this and these Celts for that. But when you're going over, so obviously Teutoburg Forest, everyone knows about that. You get Arminius and his uniting of Germanic tribes. You start to get these the tribes along that border start to become very distinct entities and form very, very specific groups as they move around. Obviously, as the collapse of the Roman Empire, there's nothing stopping them coming across the Rhine because they're getting pushed from the east. This is where you're getting the Huns, the Alans, the Goths coming in. Obviously, it's the series of migrations. So when they spread around, you get certain of these tribes. If you look at European names for countries, they all goes back to that. So, for example, one of the horse tribes that got really far west, you've got the Alemanni as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you look at what the French call Germany, it's if you look at those languages, Switzerland as well is one of these ones that's got a very distinct from its tribal name. If you actually look at some of the old languages, French is good for this because obviously French was formalised on the continent a lot earlier as well, so it doesn't have the loan words from later on as much as we do in England. But when you get the we use the term Saxon as an all-encompassing term because it makes life easier. So they're coming out of Germany. So Saxony in Germany is where one of those groups came from. And you get three main groups that arrive in England: the Saxons, the Angles, and the Jutes. The Jutes kind of disappear out of history, but I think Kent, basically from South London, down onto that little bit that's directly across from the continent. You get the Angles, which is where you get East Anglia from. A lot of them in the east, and then you get the Saxons, which is where you get Wessex, Sussex, Essex, anything with that suffix on it. That's where they come from. And it's when they merge, they become the Anglo-Saxons. So the Jutes then get pushed out. And then they drop the Saxon bit later on when the Vikings come in, because a lot of the Vikings were Danish as well. So the Saxons, when they originally came over, were actually part Danish as well through the tribes. So they were trying to create a distinction between these Viking tribes. Obviously, Viking was a job; it wasn't a nationality. It was like Danes, Norwegians that were coming over. To create that differentiation, they dropped the Saxon bit and became Angles, which then develops into English and then England. So the Saxons, as we call them in England, are really the Germanic tribes that came from what is roughly Saxony now, who came up through and merged with some of the tribal areas from Denmark. And then they came across, and we know about that merging of the tribes where they're coming across due to this later change from Anglo-Saxon to Angles when they're fighting against the Great Heathen Army, especially, and that's where that comes from as well. But essentially, yeah, so Germany, Saxony is the simple answer, but there is a bit of a mix as they come across.
All right. All right, so Dungeon Dan says, okay, so Saxons were Germanic. Yes. And I know this because I played one Total War Barbarian Invasion, and the Saxons, you start off in the northern, what used to be Northern Germania, the northern part of Germany, close to the Netherlands and that part of the area, and then you have to expand into the British Isles, take out the Romans there, and then eventually you crash with the Franks going south, with the Franks and the Alemanni going south.
So this also goes back to how the Romans named everything, because you get the Franks were named for the Francisca. It's a type of weapon, an axe that they would use quite frequently. Mm-hmm. So there is some debate over whether the name of the weapon or the name of the people came first, or they merged together. But the Saxons have the seax, which is think of a Bowie knife, but that big old Bowie knife. It's that type of thing. There's some really, really nice examples of that Some of their etching and the folded metals into the blades, and that became a symbol that they would carry, and you knew they were Saxon because of that. And that just became a thing across Germanic culture, which is one of the ways that we can identify a lot of Saxon graves in the UK, because it was such a common thing. But as a man, you would have that knife. So, and we've got a typology of those knives, therefore we can generally say that this person was either a Saxon or was part of the Saxon culture enough that they have this symbol for the weapon as well. And then obviously, because it's a very well-known thing for the tribal people, you can then trace that to wherever you want to trace it to, because it's material culture spreads as well, especially when it's got a distinct meaning in society.
Oh, all right. So, I'm trying to think. There was something. Oh, here we go. The Romans are like the French. They have a different word for everything.
yeah,
basically.
So.
The thing about the. So I was gonna say because now moving on to the Renaissance, right? We're moving on to the Renaissance, getting close to the 1500s, 1600s. We have a lot of popular painters and all that. Did Wales make a really big splash towards the Renaissance, or were they like the guy in the back of the classroom just staying quiet during the Renaissance?
What you end up with is just before the Renaissance is where Wales really becomes Wales and England sort of merge that little bit more. Okay. So the Tudor dynasty itself. So you think about it, there's been one of the weird things about English monarchs, that there hasn't really been an English monarch since 1066. The monarchy itself, the monarchs become more English, and we see this. If you actually look where they're from, you get these different dynasties coming in. So obviously Normans come over. You've got that's the French, as it were, but it's not the French, because as Dungeon Dan's watched the Vikings knows, that's Rollo that starts Normandy. They're Vikings as well. They merge their culture with the Frankish culture, and they come in with their monarchy to supplant. Eventually, over time, monarchies tend to peter out, because you either end up with the people being complacent, the people being idiots, too much inbreeding, so they can't have children and are stupid, or just generally family trees do die out. So when you get that dying out, you then get this is one of the things the Barons' Wars comes up as well, with succession is a big thing that goes through. As you're moving on through these wars into the 1400s as well, you then end up with the Tudor dynasty. Now, the Tudors weren't realistically supposed to be on the throne. It was a fight between two different nobles as whose family was going to get it, and the monarchy switched between a few people, and then you ended up with one of the prominent people at that time being Jasper ap Tudor. Now, the ap bit should give you a clue that he's Welsh. So that Tudor family is obviously linked very heavily, obviously, with the English. It's involved in all of the things that are going on beforehand. These really the most brutal war that our country's ever had. That was a war where we lost, I think it was like 2% of our population in one field in one night. That's how brutal that conflict was. So you're trying to find nobles that are alive, and the Welsh nobles obviously are, well, their central seats are quite far away from the middle where a lot of the fighting is happening. So you end up with, through various political machinations, you end up with the Tudors being brought into it. So it's Welsh family that then sits on the throne, but they're Welsh in the same way that the Normans are French. So they're a mix of the various different peoples, as all the nobles were. They're just a mix of all of the different high-ups from around the area, just by nature of the way that feudalism works. You get that. But they're definitely a Welsh line, because they've got ap in the name originally, which then gets dropped, and then you get the Tudors. And that's where it comes from. And this is where the Renaissance then comes into it. So theoretically, the splash the Welsh made was They're the monarchs. They're the people in charge of the whole country, realistically. So because of those lands, like Pembrokeshire has always been seen as this really prominent and sort of a high-level noble seat as well, an important part of the country. But obviously, as I said, with the Renaissance, you start getting this science coming into it. And that's where, obviously, it's not until the Industrial Revolution later on where Wales starts to tick up more with this as well. But you have sort of Renaissance painters. You want to go somewhere nice. Well, Pembrokeshire is still national parks today. Beautiful place. You've got to go and you're going to paint a lovely scene. So you're going to go to Wales. So it's those hot spots of people are getting pulled around. So by the Renaissance, when people generally go, oh, well, the British were doing something. And this is why we start using the term British, because it's so intermingled by that point as well. When you look at it, go, oh, this person was Welsh, but there's no real distinction between Welsh and English at that point as well. So you could look up a list of famous Welsh people. Let's do that now, because there's quite a few that you don't realise are actually Welsh. Like everyone knows, like Catherine Zeta-Jones, Tom Jones. Jones being a quite clear distinction. No, I want a historical list. Here we are. Right, so we go to right, that's actually, I thought that was going to be a lot easier to find. But it isn't that much. But a lot of them you find later on as well, more modern people as well. So you've got to think like Anthony Hopkins is Welsh. Like it's like you don't realise that these people are Welsh, and that's one of the big things about it as well. It's like one of the great British heroes, T. Lawrence. He was Welsh. Right.
Welsh.
So you get this this idea. This is what I was saying about the monarchy and the nobles as well. Well, it's like the Scottish nobles, where even time of William Wallace, they've got their Scottish nobles because their main seat is lands in Scotland. But actually, they've got just as many lands in England, and the English nobles have got the same thing where they've got lands elsewhere. So you get this massive intermingling between the two, because Wales isn't going to rebel and go anywhere. England's got no interest in doing anything to Wales because it's just there and they know it's got resources. So you end up with this slight merger, which is where you then later on you get in, especially in the 1920s and after the Industrial Revolution, this revival in Welsh culture to try and make sure that it doesn't die out, because by that point it's become so intermingled with England as to be basically indistinguishable. So in the Renaissance, you find painters, and some may be ascribed as English where they're actually Welsh as well. So it's like when you get to the Industrial Revolution, for example. Wales is very important in the Industrial Revolution, but in the Renaissance, they were, apart from being, the entire monarchy, they were just, that's where you start to get this mixing of the Welsh and English into just one sort of polyglot around, sort of becomes more diffuse rather than these are Welsh, these are English, they don't meet type of thing.
All right, so now here's a good question. It's a fun question. Who you think had a better non-bowman, the English or the Welsh?
That's a difficult one. To start off with, it would definitely be the Welsh longbowman initially, because that concept of the longbow, it's like the concept of, we talk about foods and you go, well, where's this food from, or where's the oldest pub, and you've got about 10 different people going, no, it started here, no, it started there. But it's generally accepted that essentially the longbow came from Wales, but the development of it in England was happening at the same time, and it's the use of the longbow what made it good. That's definitely down to the English monarchy going, right, everyone's got to learn the longbow. These Welsh longbows, absolutely fantastic. Everyone gets one now. So it's actually those initial longbowmen be the Welsh. But as soon as that becomes law that you have to go and train with your longbow every Sunday, no difference, and possibly an edge to the English purely for training and usage as well. So on the battlefield, especially. But it's the early days as scouting, using it for hunting. Definitely the Welsh, and then we nicked it and made it better. Really.
I'm sure you heard of Robin Hood. You know, the legend of Robin Hood.
Yeah.
You know?
That's actually really interesting. That's another one of these of no one quite knows who Robin Hood is, and there's multiple different candidates of who Robin Hood is, which actually brings us quite neatly to something else that was bring up. And this goes into the Welsh in medieval military as well.
Yes, right. That's exactly what I want to talk about.
So the famous there's a hero of Wales, Owain Glyndŵr, and he was I do believe he was a lord. He was a baron. Lords are barons are lords. And he ended up fighting in France in the 100 Years' War. And he's part of, there we are, that really shows it, the Anglo-Welsh gentry, because the gentry were a massive mix, as I was saying before. So this is one of the other reasons I want to talk to him, because obviously you were asking about Scotland as well. So when he joined, he fought with another Welshman, and they're in garrison duty on the border of Scotland in Berwick-upon-Tweed. This is from the Wikipedia, just because it's succinct and easy. And then he goes on. He's fighting in Scotland. So this is what I was saying about you get these Welsh nobles coming into it and fighting with that as well. So he then actually gets quite close with the people at the top of the military. Becomes quite important through various campaigns. A very well-renowned and well-respected soldier. He was very, very good and had a lot of experience. However, he was a leader of a rebellion, and it's sort of saying that there were rebellions, and he used that experience and all of these Welsh soldiers that had been fighting in what was ostensibly English wars, turned around and went, well, if we're doing all the fighting and we know how the military works, we can be the guys that chuck them out. And that then makes an effort to get the Welsh nobles together and then end up with a monarchy, which is often the goal when you have the rebellions in Wales, is to actually, as soon as you get a monarch in charge of Wales, you've got better bargaining power with the monarchs of the rest of the Isles. They didn't go the other way like Ireland did, where they just made everyone a king. They stayed with the prince. So you end up with this situation where he's incredibly famous and has worked closely throughout with the high up nobles. And then so he's essentially a folk hero as well. And he's, I believe, possibly, I'd have to look deeper into it, but if I remember rightly, Wikipedia wasn't as helpful as I thought it might be on it. He's the first Prince of Wales, so as we know, is the Prince of Wales, as the Prince of all Wales. So they kind of get their king, but he's not a king, he's a prince, which is why the reigning monarch's successor, so the eldest child now, doesn't have to be son, it just happens to be a son, becomes the Prince of Wales. And because that's seen as the most prominent noble title. And that's the origination of that. It all comes down to this rebellion with Owain Glyndŵr. He's got there's statues of him. There's the actual day dedicated to him as well, and he's celebrated. A bit of a King Arthur figure, really. About that one specific noble as well. But he's a really good example of how, as I was saying, that it wasn't that the Welsh went and fought against the Scottish. It's the Welsh were fighting with the English, and they filled up a lot of these bits of the armies and fought with them across all the wars until they got fed up with it. because the Welsh were paid less as well. They it's based like the
Yes.
Saxons were really hardcore racists. They had it comes down to things like weregild, which is it's the blood price. So if you killed someone, they had a big problem with people murdering people, and then someone would come along and murder them for murdering a member of their family, and then it ended up having all of these prominent Saxons dying. They're like, no murders. If you kill someone, you then have to pay a fine. You pay a large sum of money to the family as restitution as well. Sounds like a weird concept, because if you had lots of money, theoretically, you could just kill whoever you wanted and pay them off. But it didn't quite work like that in practice, because the amounts were quite high. But depending on who you killed was that level of things. And the Welsh are right down at the bottom with like killing slaves as well. They're constantly seen as that lesser. It's one of the reasons for England's rebellion, because they're fighting, but they're seen as lesser than the English soldiers. So they would receive less for what they're doing when they're doing the same thing. As we talked about with the longbow, they're the people who brought the longbow in. They're the people doing all this fighting as well. So you get this really interesting juxtaposition of they always see this the second class of the people in the Isles.
And that flows perfectly into my next point. We're going to be moving into the 1700s. Yeah, we're going to be jumping ahead to history, the 1700s, during the Protestant era. Where the Protestants starting to move in. In case you don't know, the 1700s education in Wales was very low in this period, with the only education available being in English. So if you wanted to be educated in Wales, you had to learn English. The problem was not enough people spoke Welsh. So basically, it's like here in Puerto Rico. If you want to be, like the elite, in Puerto Rico, you have to learn English and Spanish. But now the poor people here only know Spanish, so they kind of get gypped because they can't speak English. Yeah. Which is why sometimes I kind of feel bad for my brothers and sisters here, because I can speak both languages, but I had an unfair advantage growing up in the United States. Not everybody's got that advantage. So the same thing could be applied to Wales. Some people in Wales, they were educated, but that's because they came to Wales from England. They moved to Wales, but they were born in England. They were raised in England.
Yep.
So it's like
it's treated as a second-class citizen thing that I was talking about. It really comes to a head in this period as well.
Exactly. So basically, a man named Griffith Jones started circulating schools in Wales. And the instruction of these schools was Welsh. So Griffith Jones was basically a Welsh minister in the Church of England, and he was a promoter of Methodism, which is a Protestant belief, Methodism. The Methodist Church.
Methodists,
which is popular here in Puerto Rico. We have a lot of Methodist members. In fact, my neighbor used to be Methodist before she converted into another Reformed church. So just a little tangent there. But Griffin Jones, he was responsible for bringing education to Wales, where even those who spoke nothing but Welsh could actually be educated, and have a chance to being educated. You didn't have to be a total dumbass, just because you didn't know English. So the 1700s was kind of what I'd like to call an educational revolution in Wales, where people, even the poor got a chance to catch up.
It's a lot of that comes from as well as from the 1600s in England as well. So the school that I went to was founded in 1666. It was right around the time of the Civil War, and I was actually taught in that original school as well. And that came out of it was a merchant tailors school. So a lot of schools were all private. So, you set up a school to do that. So you have the guild. So the school I went to was essentially a guild school. So the guild gave the money to educate people. So if they have educated people, those people can then come and be members of the guild. The guild then makes more money. It's that logical thing. But you also have, with the Methodists, with these the Protestant reforms at the time. there's a lot of this going out and helping people seems
right.
one of the things about Puritans that
Right.
it was why a lot of people joined, because it was that selflessness that you wanted to. Yes, you had to think of religion in their way, but you go and you help people. So you end up with this spread of ministers going out and setting up schools, or where a church might have a hall or buildings attached to it, they might set up these small schools. And then obviously when it gets to Wales as well, when you've got English priests going over there, they're just going to teach in English. So it's going to carry that on of it's still in English. So if you initially speak Welsh, you can't. So then it took, obviously, as you said, this guy going over there and going, right, well, yes, we can teach English, but we can, if you speak Welsh, you can speak Welsh to them and then move it on to learning English as well, making it, as you say, as bilingual, to give the opportunities to these people. And it's a really big thing. It's one of the ideas that comes out of the Renaissance as well. And actually, that initial thing is one of the things that then leads on to the Industrial Revolution, which is really not that long afterwards as well. But that whole Welsh thing is quite interesting. I worked with a guy who is archaeologist, had an archaeology degree, and he wanted to go into primary school teaching at one point. So he went and he applied to a primary school teaching course, and they looked at his qualifications. Bear in mind, this guy has a degree, and they refused him because his GCSE English wasn't good enough, which is very, very bizarre. So that's your high school. That's the one that you do at high school. A levels is the one that you do sort of. That's our weird bit. That's the first year of your university education. Essentially, that's our A levels. And then obviously you get university above. So he's already gone through 2 steps above this. However, he did turn around to them and said, well, he will be teaching in Wales, and he had the required level, but in Welsh as well. Welsh speaker, obviously, as well. And they wouldn't accept it. You had to be educated, but you had to have that level of education in English to be able to teach Welsh, teaching a Welsh school. So it still happens to this day, or you get these little hangovers from it as well, where it isn't quite accepted as a thing, where English is the language for these things. There isn't this exception made. Whereas Wales has got some of the best universities as well. So really prominent ones, like Aberystwyth is really, really amazing university. And then you've got Cardiff, Swansea. I've got a lot of friends who went to Swansea University, actually. They're all, those 3 universities, really, really big. So this education has come forward, but you still get these little bits in it where you need English and Welsh. And obviously it's a little bit easier these days because of the way our education system works. But that would never have been a thing if it hadn't have been for this chap in the 1700s, actually, doing what he said he was going to do. Which was cool.
All right. Actually, and we got an interesting question by a Dungeon Dan here. Question from Wales Matfield. In this era, this discussion is set in were there any Welsh folklore or cryptids the people feared? That's an interesting question. I actually didn't really get a chance to look up any folklore or cryptids in Wales. That's actually a pretty good question.
The only one that I know of is that really creepy horse thing about. That's the only one that I've come across. Whereas a lot of the folklore that I do know of, so if you look at some of the Irish folklore as well, because it's Celtic folklore, Wales is part of that group of just Celtic folklore in general. So you get a lot of the same transfers over. So if you look at something like say Finn McCool, he went out and he killed giants, and there were giants of Ireland, giants of Scotland, giants of Wales. And it's the whole that the Isle of Man was created when the giants scooped up a handful of mud, forming Loch Ness, and threw it at the giant was going back to Wales as well. So they had giants, and obviously by their flag they had dragons as well. So so you've got that initial Celtic bit as well. So if you think of like Merlin, for example, and that should have he's potentially Welsh. As well, because it's linked to Druids as well, and obviously that was the last Anglesey was the last hideout of the Druids. So you get that initial Celtic folklore that stays alive. Whereas obviously in England, we have that a big influence from obviously the Germanic heritage of the Saxons as well. So ours gets a little bit mixed up, unless you go into rural areas, you still get some of the Celtic stuff, obviously. But specifically Welsh, apart from that one with the horses' heads, no, it's all, to me, it's all mainly just the same things that if you looked into Irish folklore, but I don't know huge amounts about it, unfortunately. So.
Well, I mean, the only thing I know about Wales is that the mythical creature of Wales is the red dragon. I mean, obviously, it's on the flag. That's the mythical creature of Wales is the red dragon. But you know, I really couldn't tell you what the meaning is. I mean, you know, so I mean, it's a good question, Dungeon. I guess we just didn't research it enough. Unfortunately, we don't know too much, but it's a good question, and it might be something we need to cover in a future show.
Yeah,
you know,
very much so.
quantity. Yeah, that might be some homework for us to do.
Do you want to know the history of the red dragon? So the history of the red dragon is actually really interesting. It's the reason it's there is because the Welsh didn't like the English, and it goes back to if you look at the Byzantine military, they have what's called dragon standards, and it goes a lot back to at the time of people having these standards. So it became a prominent thing to have these have dragons. So the English, and I can't remember whether it was Mercia or Wessex, but it had the white dragon. And the white dragon and the red dragon fought, and the red dragon won. So that's why it's on the flag, because it's a symbol of that fight against the English. We lost the white dragon on our flag, which is disappointing. Put it back on there. Or just, because that's the other element, is that the Welsh flag isn't part of the flag of the UK. Is obviously made up of Northern Ireland, Scotland, and England, all of the crosses put together. That's why it's a series of crosses. But there is nothing no element from the Welsh flag that's been added onto it as well. Purely for this, as we were talking about in the medieval period, it being being so linked and being part of essentially the English kingdom at the time. It was considered that the English flag was the same as the Welsh flag. If you flew the Welsh flag, it's because you were rebelling against England, so they sort of kept it to the side as well.
All right, yeah. So, well, we're coming to the end of the show, man. I think we definitely need another hour to cover Wales. There was definitely a lot we missed, but I think we're coming to the end of the show, and guys, we like to thank you for watching. Dan, thank you, Dungeon Dan, for watching. And before we go, I just want to remind you guys, if you want to check out the entire library of shows we've done a lot of shows already. Please check us out on YouTube, the Book Asylum. Please check out our YouTube channel. It's not just the Age of Podcast. We got Dungeon Dan does book reviews. Jen does the Book Asylum podcast. You know, we got other stuff for you guys to go check out. So please check out the Book Asylum on YouTube and consider subscribing. We're up to 140 subscribers. We got over 130 videos, and it's only going up. And yeah, we got new shows planned. In fact, the next show, Aiden, we're gonna be doing is and you got a couple of weeks to prepare. We're gonna be talking about the Indo-Greek kingdom, the Bactrian kingdom.
Oh, that's nice. Interesting.
I know we did a show before. In my old show, but you know, I feel like now that we have 2 weeks to prepare, we could come up with something even better. The Bactrian Kingdom, you know, one of the more interesting civilizations, as they have settled on what's considered the graveyard for many empires, Afghanistan. I like to call it the graveyard of many empires. The many empires have tried to settle in Afghanistan. It just haven't been able to survive.
It's one other thing about the YouTube channel. It's the way that it's divided up on there. It's been put into playlists as well, so it's nice and easy to. If you just wanted to listen to us, you could listen to that as well. Yep. Or obviously you go to the main page and you can listen to a mix of them. But if you just wanted to listen to one of them, they've been placed as well. It's really nice to have that as well.
Yeah, great, man. And like I said, we got Dungeon Dan and his. You know, and his book reviews. He does some really good 60-second reviews on the videos he does, the wheels, and I enjoy them. Then Jen does the book assignment where she interviews different people. Then you got us, and then Jennifer also has the paranormal show where she talks about the paranormal if you're into that kind of stuff. And then of course you got us, the Age of Warfare, the geeks, the history nerds. But anyway, guys, so yeah, give that a check. Subscribe, comment, and of course, as we always make, if you could comment, give us a mic. It'll help us in the algorithms just show your support. So anyway, that's gonna be it for this show. I've been Tertullian Angelus Maximus. That is my man, the gay Aiden Collier. We're gonna be back in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. That's right before Christmas, the Saturday before Christmas. So yeah, we'll be we're talking about the Indo-Greek kingdom. What happened after Alexander got to India? Should be fun.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, guys, that's going to be it for us. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and take care.
All right, take care, guys. Bye-bye.